Hello and welcome to Smart Money Simplified with Brent Mekosh. Brent, what's going on, my man?
Eric, I got up this morning. I went to the gym. I got on the treadmill. I ran about 3.5 miles in preparation. Tomorrow, I'm running a half marathon, so I'm running 13 miles tomorrow. So, I think that's impressive, right? That I got out and moved my body a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm in Nebraska, which is like super flat. So I
Right.
went onto my porch and I looked down the road 3.5 miles and went back
It,
inside. How
it
about
did. You
that?
saw probably the next state from your porch in
It
Nebraska.
was 3 degrees. I said, no, I'm good. I'm going to go ahead and, eat breakfast, get coffee, and go to work.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I'm not of the same mindset. I do need to exercise, though. So maybe you and I will talk about that later sometime.
We can talk about that. So I'm excited. I'll be in Sedona tomorrow running a half marathon. And
That's
when we
awesome.
think of pinnacles of running, a lot of people think of the Boston Marathon. And
Mm.
everybody's heard of the Boston Marathon.
Oh,
It's a
yeah.
major goal for a lot of runners to get to that. And there's a spot in the Boston Marathon called Heartbreak Hill, which you hit at about mile 20.5. And you got about a 91-foot climb at mile
Wow.
20.5. And it just blows people out because they've been at this experience now for 20 plus miles. Now, if I were to ask you, is that the pinnacle of running, the Boston Marathon?
Me? Sure. I mean,
Now,
that's
what?
that's the one marathon I know. I mean, if that's what you're asking me, yeah, absolutely. The Boston Marathon seems to be the thing. And I never knew about the hill. Why would they do that toward the end of the race?
And
And why is it
91
uphill
feet,
instead of
right? I mean, this
downhill?
crazy hill at mile 20.5. It's
Ugh.
insane. But they do that. Now, what if I were to tell you that there's a whole nother destination for people that are in the long running? I'll give you one example. There's a race called the Western States. It starts in Lake Tahoe. It runs down basically through the Sierra Nevada, and it's 100 miles. And in the
Wow.
Western states, there's 18,000 feet of climbing through that 100 miles. We're talking about, single track trails. You're deep in the mountains.
Jeez.
The Hard Rock 100, San Juan Mountains in Colorado. It's 100 miles. There's 33,000 feet of climbing in that 100 miles. Who is crazy enough to do that kind of thing?
I get tired driving 100 miles.
Yeah.
I need to take
well,
a break.
well, I am pretty fired up. I got a guest today joining me. I have John Burton. I first met John actually in 2011, and I ran what at the time was my first ultra marathon. It was a 50-mile race in the South Hills of Black Hills of South Dakota. John was running it was your first 100-mile race, wasn't it, John?
Yes, well, it was my first 100-mile finish. It wasn't my first 100-mile attempt.
Okay, there we go. And so it was his first 100-mile finish was in South Dakota when I first met him. We've kept in contact since then. Since
Yep.
then, I've done the 50-mile distance a couple times, and I haven't
Mm.
ventured beyond that. John has done up to 200-mile races since that point. So we're talking about a whole different level of running. And it's a world that I think if you're not in that ultra running community, it's something completely different, something that people didn't even know existed and was out there. Got a little bit of exposure several years ago when the book Born to Run came out, where they talked about that quite a bit. But John's a guy that's has a ton of experience in this space, and when he's not running, he's also a software product manager. So you've got two kind of really competing personality traits. So you've got the software product manager side, and then you've got this ultra running side. And I guess let's just open it in this way. First, John, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you
hmm
started running, and what motivates somebody to get up and decide they want to do a 100 or 200-mile running race. No, we're not talking motorcycles here to anybody that's listening. This is you're doing this under your own power on foot. So, John,
Yeah.
thank you for joining me.
Oh, Brent, thanks for having me. And say, well, the introduction made me a little bit uncomfortable because I'm a pretty humble guy. I don't like to, constantly talk about my running. I would never, mention that I've won two state championships or a national championship.
Never.
I don't have trophies littered around my office or anything. Oh, sip of water.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. What were we talking about there?
So,
Oh yeah.
first of all, when people hear this
Oh, we
stuff,
got in.
crazy distances. So, give us an idea in terms of who you are, what got you started in this, and just tell us more about yourself and what got you here.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's all relative. I know you're a big fan of David Goggins, who's a
Yeah.
pretty famous ultra runner, celebrity, written some books, and that guy's a badass Navy SEAL, special warfare, all jacked. Eats 800 calories a day, raw carrots or something. Only
Yeah.
takes cold showers.
Yep.
Sleeps 3 hours a night. And I think that's what a lot of people think about when they think of these crazy ultra runners. And I want to say I'm kind of the antithesis of that. As you mentioned, I'm a nerdy business computer software guy, right? I'm a product manager in tech. I was never really a great athlete. I was literally the slowest runner in my elementary school, dead last in every sprint. I will say I did have some aptitude for longer distance running. So when it came to the 600 meters, I actually won in our school. I think mainly because no one else wanted to run that far in fifth grade.
Right.
I went to the city championships and I got last place. So no one would ever look at me and say, "Oh, that guy's going to be winning 100-mile races one day." But like anything, whether it's work or relationships or hobbies and other skills you want to get good at least for me, it's not about having some natural gift. It's about putting in the hard work and making a conscious effort to improve, looking for new training strategies. Yeah, watching the diet a little bit, but I'll tell you right now, I'm not eating 800 calories a day of carrots. I like my beer, I like my bread,
Yeah.
I like a good dessert. But getting into running, it's something I'd always enjoyed. And my father was a runner. Uh, he worked in an automobile factory, General Motors Oldsmobile in Lansing, Michigan,
Yeah, you're a
most of his
Michigan
life.
guy. That's right.
Yeah.
Originally.
And he smoked a pack of cigarettes a day, and then he'd go out and run marathons. It was so for me, it was as a kid, that was just, oh, your dad runs marathons. It was kind of a normal thing to go out running with him in the evenings. And then I ran cross country in high school. It was very unremarkable. I was the fifth or fourth guy on the team, so one of the last people to even score any points. Kind of Mr. Irrelevant in most races. But I enjoyed it, and I stuck with it. And you start seeing a little bit of progress. Like, oh, I wasn't last place this time. Oh, I broke my PR. And I think as long as you're enjoying something, putting in the effort, you know, it comes easy, or it's manageable, especially when you start seeing progress and seeing results. So yeah, it's something I've been doing all my life. And I've done some triathlons, some 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons. And then I was doing a trail race, a half marathon trail race out here in California. I'd moved from Michigan, and very flat, not many hills where I lived. And when I moved out to California for work in the late 90s, it was a bit of a shock for me. They had these things called mountains, and
Big
people
ones.
actually ran up the mountains.
Yeah.
And I signed up for this half marathon, and I didn't really read the fine print or the details. Got there and discovered it was 10K, or 6.5 miles uphill and then right back downhill. So the race went off. I'm a young, kind of fit guy at the time, and up there at the front, thinking, oh yeah, this is great. And then we start climbing up the hill gradually, and I get passed by a few of the front runners. I'm like, oh, it's fine,
Yeah.
keep going. And then I start getting passed by some mid-packers and some people who did not look that fit, and then some older gentlemen, moms pushing strollers.
Yeah.
Everyone passes me, and it was just demoralizing. And I was crushed after that. So you can either give up or you can double down. So I started training in the hills. I'm like, all right, I can't have this happen again. Got a little bit better at it, and went back a couple years later, did that same race, and I think I finished third place that time.
That's a pretty big improvement.
Yeah, so I'm standing around the finish line. You have all the junk food for runners, right? For ultra runners, long distance runners, you have your M&Ms, and it's all sugar food.
Yeah.
I'm sitting there having a good time eating some food, and the woman who won the women's race she finished pretty high overall, top 10, I think, first woman. And we started chatting, and now that's my wife, Amy. We've been married.
I did not know that's how you met Amy.
Yeah, we met at a half marathon trail race in the mountains. So, and
There you go. That's a big payoff from running already.
Well, there you go, right? Pays dividends. And it was talking with her where she told me she was training for this thing called a 50K. And I've heard of marathons. I've heard of the Boston Marathon. I'd never run a marathon at the time. But I wanted to impress her. I'm like, oh yeah, it's funny you mention it. I'm also training for an ultra marathon, 50K. Yeah, I'm all about that kind of stuff.
It's for our listeners, and when we say ultra marathon, it's going to come up a bunch in this conversation. Yeah. Is anything above a marathon, which is 26.2 miles. So when you start getting 50Ks, about 30 miles, you get beyond that distance, that's an ultra marathon. So anyway, John, back to you
Yeah,
on that.
thanks for the clarification there. Yeah, so she told me she was training for this thing, which I thought was crazy. I didn't know anyone ran further than a marathon. And yeah, we made plans, go for a training run, and then she introduced me to some of her ultra marathon friends. And kind of a funny story, Brent. They told me, yeah, we're gonna go for a long run on Saturday if you want to join us. And at the time I was a road runner. And I'm like, yeah, sounds good. So I show up, I'm wearing my road running shoes. I think they said to bring some water because it was kind of a long, hilly run in the mountains. So I brought one of those little, like, I don't know, 10 or 12 ounce plastic bottles of water that you get at the gas station. And these guys all had on packs with water bottles in the front and water in the back and snacks. And I was like, what is wrong with these people, right? We're going for a run. So we take off running, and I look around. I'm the only one running. They're walking. And it's kind of a slight hill, but like, all right, this is just ridiculous. So
Yeah.
I keep running, and I'm in the front for 8 miles, 10 miles. I start getting a little tired, a little thirsty, and this is all uphill in the mountains. I polished off my little water bottle. About mile 20, Amy, now my wife, she catches up to me. She's like, "Hey, you went out pretty hard." I'm like, "Well, just running." She's like, "Where's your water?" I'm like, "Oh, I drank that already." So yeah, I would have died out there. Luckily, she shared some of her water with me, and I made it back to the finish line. But it was a very humbling experience, and I quickly learned why those ultra runners started off walking up the hill. I learned that it's not a marathon where you're going out at 6-minute pace and doing it the whole time. There are places where it makes sense to do power hiking or conserve your energy if you're on a steep hill, where in the long run it's better to hike that section and then save your legs for the more runnable downhill or flat section. So that was my first introduction to this world of long distance ultra running.
So what was your first actual ultra race?
Man, Brent, I honestly don't remember. It was probably, I think, a local 50K, maybe a local 50 miler. I do remember some of those first races where I didn't really understand at the time proper training, coming from
nutrition,
more of a nutrition, hydration.
Yep.
So it was always the same. I would go out running as hard as I could the first couple hours, and then wouldn't eat anything, of course, no gels or nutrition, maybe drink some water at the aid stations. And then the last 10 miles or so was always this struggle. Why am I doing this? I got to make it to the finish line. I think that probably sums up my first 4 or 5 races before I started to discover that, you could bring food with you. You can bring gels with you. You can drink water or sports drinks during these events.
Yeah. And so for people that are listening to this that might not be sure how these races work, generally they happen in very remote places. Generally, you have 5, 6, 7, sometimes longer distances between aid stations. Aid stations, your setup at an ultra run is very different than you would have in a road race, where it might be some Gatorade and water and some gels. I mean, they're movable feasts. There could be tacos, there could be pizza, there could be pretty much everything.
Quesadillas,
you name it. But they're almost like these little islands of civilization between very long distances of not a lot of anything. And these are not the Boston Marathon where you have thousands of participants. There might be 40, 50, or you can go a very long period of time without seeing a soul. So you're on your own for a while. You got to manage that nutrition, you got to manage that water, and all the other things, obviously, to keep your body going. But so you get into this, you run a couple of these races. I'm really curious, and we've talked about this a little bit, but what is it about this distance, these races, that you find so appealing that then caused you to push yourself beyond the 50K? I mean, 200 miles is insane. I think it's insane. I've done several ultras. I think 200 miles is crazy, and I do want to talk about that experience. But what was it what set the spark off that made you say, "Hey, what 50K is not really the distance anymore. There's something beyond"?
Yeah, and Brent, I'm glad you gave that clarification to the listeners. So, and maybe even adding a little more context,
Please.
Some of these races, as you mentioned, they're not huge fields, and even if there is a rather large field, and large for ultra running could just be a couple hundred runners. There are very few races, maybe UTMB in Europe and There's a few races like Way to Cool where you might have 10,000 or more people. But a typical ultra marathon, you might have under 100 people. The big ones at most are 200-300 people. And so when you're talking about a race that could take 20 to 30 hours, depending on how mountainous the terrain is and how long the course is, you get, as you described, long sections where you're going maybe 8 miles, maybe 20 miles, depending on the race, in between aid stations, where you don't see anyone, particularly if you're running in the front of the race,
Which you often are.
which
Yeah.
later in my career I started to do. Yeah, you might go the entire race and never run with anyone else. So you're out there potentially 20, 30 hours alone with your thoughts, other than maybe every couple hours you come to an aid station, you got the, yeah, you're doing great, and you eat some food, and then you're alone with yourself again. And so if you talk to different people about why they do it, you get some different answers. But for me, I kind of enjoy the solitude and the time alone. And you can kind of use it as a walking meditation, a running meditation, where I'm not really thinking about my problems or issues at work or relationships, just kind of being present in the moment and looking at that mountain peak over there, or looking at that river. And it seems odd to say that for 20, 30 hours, you're not thinking about anything, but in some cases, it's just peaceful. You're alone in the wilderness and enjoying the scenery. You kind of get into a rhythm where you're pushing hard, but you're not feeling like you're dying. And for me, I think that's a big part of it, is just being alone in nature. Or, there may be periods where you're running with one or two other people and you have a little conversation, and you might run together for a couple of hours and talk about all kinds of things. And then 10, 20 hours, you don't see them and you're running by yourself. So I think that's part of it. But also, you hear a lot of endurance athletes talk about wanting to challenge themselves and see what they're capable of. And I think for me, that was definitely part of it, because having not been a particularly gifted athlete, I found something that I enjoyed. And then eventually, after putting in a lot of work, started seeing some success at it. Right? You start to think, oh, I thought a marathon was the most anyone can do. And now I've run 50K, or in your case, Brent, you've run 50 milers. Right? And, we joke about, I legitimately don't like to drive 50 miles. I'm not driving 50 miles up to San Francisco. Right? Here you are, you're running 50 miles. And then you think, well, could I do 100K? Could I do 100 miles? And, what's the limit? You have people who are doing these events where they're running the entire length of the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Coast Trail, and it's taking them a month, and they're running all day, every day, and they sleep for a few hours at night. So you start to look at some of these things and think, am I capable of doing that? Is this something I could do? And so for me, that was definitely part of the appeal, is,
Yeah.
Can I run 100 miles? Can I run 200 miles? What's the limit? How good can I get, or how far can I push myself?
Yeah. And I concur with that. I think that again, for me, I'm going to echo what you're saying in the sense of, you're right. You have time to think about everything, but sometimes you think about nothing, and you have these sort of rare moments of clarity, for sure. Yeah. And that race where I met you, because I want to talk about your feet after that race. But I remember it was a mile, about 27. Mine was 50 miles, and obviously John was doing 100. And at mile 27, I badly twisted my ankle, and I was thinking, this race is probably over. And then it kind of went numb. And so I'm like, all right, let's just kind of keep going on it. And then I didn't realize, I knew nothing about hydration. I knew nothing about managing your electrolytes. And I'm at mile 36, and I was still managing kind of a little bit of a gait, but I'm in a lot of pain. And now my vision goes very narrow and black and white. And then I just flat out lay down on my back, and a guy comes up and he says, "Have you had any salt today?" And I'd been drinking a ton of water, but absolutely no salt. And I said, "No." He goes, "Eat this now." And he like a handful of salt pills. And all of a sudden the world opens up, and I was able to stagger in and finish that thing in a lot longer than for sure I thought it was going to take. But my takeaway from that is, halfway through the race, I didn't think I physically had anything left, but somehow you finished it. And it's just that one step in front of the other, then you realize you can accomplish far more if you just take that one little moment at a time. I mean, is that very similar when you talk about challenging yourself? Is that the same mentality that you have?
Yeah, Brent, it's funny you mentioned that, because I've had races where I've won, and I almost quit halfway into the race.
Yeah.
Like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I'm exhausted, my body's falling apart, the knees hurting and the foot's hurting. I fell off a bridge and hurt my wrist and just bleeding. I'm like, yeah, I'm done. I legitimately can't go another mile. But then you think, well, I can probably go another half mile though,
But dig
right?
into that. Dig into that experience more because I don't fully understand it. And what you're describing sounds terrible. I mean, it sounds awful. Like make the pain stop.
Yeah.
So what is it that keeps you moving forward?
Yeah. So if I think back to this race here, Hard Rock 100, which
I
is
definitely want
also
to talk about the Hard Rock.
the
Yeah.
picture behind me. So the 100-mile races you described in the San Juan Mountains in Colorado, where it has the equivalent of Mount Everest gain, right? Nearly 30,000 feet of vertical gain. And I was in that race at altitude. The altitude sickness had gotten to me. I was feeling nauseous, feeling like I wanted to puke, trouble breathing, just taking short little breaths. Had some severe cramping where I put my foot the wrong way. It felt like my whole leg was going to cramp up. And I just sit down at a rock, sit down, lean against this rock, catch my breath, watch people come by. And this was, I don't know, mile 20 of
Yeah.
the
You got
race.
a long way to go.
I clearly I can't do 80 more miles of this, right? It's just ridiculous. And then I'm hiking up this mountain near the top of the mountain and in a bad mood, not feeling great, and it's icy, snowy, icy, and I just misstepped on I thought it was just snow, but there was some ice underneath it, and misstepped and slipped, and I started sliding off the mountain, frantically grabbing for rocks or anything to kind of keep myself from going off the edge, and I grabbed a pile of rocks and there was a big rock on top. It fell and it landed on my finger, scattered it into 5 pieces. So now I'm altitude sick, I'm nauseous, can't breathe, and I've got a broken finger that's throbbing. And really, I thought, okay, I've trained so hard for this race, I'm not going to quit, but it's not looking good. And then keep moving forward. First of all, you can't just stop on the top of a mountain, you freeze to death, right? So you need to get yourself down to the next aid station, to civilization. Maybe it's not civilization, maybe it's a logging road where some people were able to drive in and they've set up a little kind of canopy or tent and they've got food and maybe a nurse or a medic or someone who can look after you. Worst case scenario, they can give you a ride out. So you got to get to that point, right? Self-extraction, get to an aid station where then you can assess. And that sometimes take a couple hours. So a couple hours later, I'm like, well, I was ready to quit on top of the mountain, but somehow I made it another couple of hours. Can I make it to the next aid station? I mean, it's a broken finger. I don't run on my fingers, right? So I can keep running with a broken finger. And really, I think a big part of it is problem solving and troubleshooting. So when you have these issues, you start thinking, okay, I'm having trouble or I'm cramping up, or in your case, you were hyponatremic because you drank too much water and not enough electrolytes. If you know what you're doing and you've been in those situations before, you can say, okay, I know I need to take some salt, or I know I need to take in some more calories. Or if the altitude is getting to you, I know I need to slow down, get my heart rate down, maybe not push so hard when I'm at high altitude and wait until get down to the lower altitudes and start pushing hard again. So it just becomes a series of problem solving. How do I solve this particular issue, right? In your case with your knee, or if it's an ankle, how do I maybe change my gait or my stride so I'm not putting so much weight on it, which is not ideal, but you're still able to continue. So in that case, in Hard Rock, I kept going and eventually I started feeling great again. And the last 10 miles of that race, I was just flying. I was being chased by a kind of famous professional ultra runner. Thought for sure he was going to catch me, and I put 18 minutes on him on that last 10K, just hammering it. So, where did that energy come from, and how do you tap into those reserves? And that's again kind of gets to the crux of what we were talking about, or at least hinting at, which is as humans, we have so much potential, and I think it's very rare that we fully tap into it unless we're in a life-threatening emergency where the story of the old woman who lifts the car up
Yeah.
because she's got all the adrenaline and everything flowing through her. And so I do think that in general, we're capable of a lot more than maybe we think we can. We just have to put ourselves in those situations, ideally with the proper training and the proper experience so that we can accomplish that. But yeah, that example at Hard Rock was kind of, for me, that was when the light clicked on that, okay, you can get through some really tough situations if you think through your problems, do some troubleshooting, and just kind of tap into those hidden reserves that maybe we don't access on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I think you see, in terms of doing these larger events, and again, I can only speak from the 50-mile distance, but you have a lifetime, not a full, almost a lifetime of
Seems like it,
emotions
huh?
in that period of time. I remember even going back to that Black Hills race. I kind of very typically went out way too hard in the beginning. But it's beautiful. The day is perfect. It's, the grass is green and everything's alive and vibrant. And I am feeling astounding, as high as I've ever probably been. There's a picture of me that we're coming through an aid station that I have, and there's this look on my face. I still look at it and I'm like, I know what I was feeling at that exact moment. It was
Right.
pure ecstasy. Now, fast forward 7-8 hours later, and it was a horror show. And then you forward, to when you finish, but you go through this range. And I think what for me is a great learning experience whenever you're going through these physical issues is that you realize that it passes. Whatever it is passes. The good stuff passes.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, it'd be great if you could maintain that. The bad stuff passes, but it ebbs and flows. And so I think that even psychologically and mentally, you're forced to deal with a range of emotions in a very compressed time. And I think there's a lot of magic in that. Like how much are you going to listen to that negative voice versus how much you're going to believe in the euphoria. It's never as good as you think. It's never as bad as you think either. The truth is somewhere in between. But I think that's the magic of some of these distances. Now, one thing I definitely want to talk about with you is, so these races, when we're touching on them a little bit in terms of, the remote, they're out there. John, you agree with me when I say that it's a kind of pretty eclectic group of people, to put it mildly, that engage in these type of races? Now, for those of us, the people that are watching this on video, John looks pretty pulled together. He's got nice black jacket on, red shirt, glasses, looking very sophisticated. There's
cold in here, man.
Yeah. Occasionally the Stars and Stripes Speedo and a cape will come out. So there's some strange characters, and there might not be anything more strange in the ultra running world, which by itself is weird, than the Barclays relay. Tell me about that, and let us, as the listener, let us know exactly what this thing is, because I think it's the craziest thing on the entire planet.
So the Barkley Marathons, if you're not familiar with it, there's a Netflix documentary about it, but it's a race in Tennessee, kind of, as Brent mentioned, very, very eclectic, very hard to get into. There's this convoluted process of applying to even get into the race. Only 40 or so people are allowed in each year, and you have to be one of the top runners. Everyone in it has 100, 200-mile races, that records on FKT, so the fastest known time of someone running from one mountain range to another. So around the world, just the top runners, 100K champion from one country, 100K champion from another country, and definitely some characters. And,
it's like the secret society of ultra running. If you get the invite, it's totally.
It is. It's, if you think of, you've ever seen the old Jean-Claude Van Damme movie Bloodsport, like this underground tournament
Yes.
of the top martial arts fighters? That's how I describe Barkley. It's this underground race, the top runners from around the world. It used to be no fanfare, no media. You just showed up on April Fool's Day and did this race. But it picked up a following over the years, and people started live tweet streaming it, and you got media out there. And the year I did it, I was actually carrying a GoPro to record footage for a TV show that was interested in it. But the race is unique in that most of it is off trail, and so you have to navigate just through the woods, through sawbriars and thickets, and you're not allowed any GPS device or electronic device. So the race director, who's this old school guy, Laz, he has a beard and he wears a flannel shirt and he smokes a cigarette. That's the start of the race. When he lights up a cigarette, the race starts. Everything about this race is crazy, including, as I mentioned, you don't get a GPS device. He issues everyone a $10 watch from Walmart. And I don't know if you can see this. You guys see this? This still has water and fog in it. This was totally useless to me. What time is it? I don't know. It's fog o'clock. So I have no idea how long I've been running or where I was running. But you get one of these things at the start. And so this is Barkley Marathon's emergency clicker. Right. So if you find yourself lost out in the woods with no one around, you press this button and help is coming. The helicopter is arriving, except this is totally non-functional. There is no electronics in here, no battery in here. This is just a piece of metal. Does nothing. So, and that's the motto of Barclay. I don't know if you saw when I held up the race bib, but if you can see the bottom there, it says, "Help is not coming." So you're out there on your own. So, only I think 15 people have ever completed this race. Some people have completed it multiple times, but they like to say more people have been on the moon than completed Barkley Marathon. So many years, nobody finishes the race. You have to do 5 loops. They claim it's 20 miles. I think it's closer to 26 miles per loop. And again, just through the forest, you're navigating with a hand-drawn map and a compass.
And you've got to find a book and tear a page from it or something, right? That's how you completed the.
Right. So each lap, like the first lap I was bib number 55. The next lap I was bib number 109. And you're going through the woods and you have to find these books that are hidden in trees, under rocks, and just the most bizarre places. And then, whatever your bib number is, if you're bib number 109, then you have to find page 109 in the book and rip it out. And the books all have titles like Dead in the Woods or What Am I Doing with My Life? So they're kind of mocking you. The whole race is just crazy and eclectic, but really is sort of like the Super Bowl of ultra running. The process for applying and getting in is closely guarded. There's a lot of steps and you have to write essays and do other things. And I was lucky enough that I finally had some success in ultra running, won some 100-mile races. I finished 3rd at the first Tahoe 200-mile race. And I applied for Barkley and I got into the race and I was thrilled because, right, this is for me the ultimate. I love Hard Rock and Hard Rock is my favorite race, but at the time I thought, hey, Barkley is really, the hardest thing to get into. I want to do it and I want to try to finish it. Spoiler alert, I did not finish it. I finished 2 loops, but unfortunately the second loop was so slow that I was not allowed to go back out and continue for a 3rd loop. But you kind of go in one direction and then the opposite direction. So I made 2 loops, 1 loop in each direction. And for me, that was, something to feel pretty good about. My goal was to not be the first person to get lost. And some people spent the night out there. They found them days later over in another county or there's a lot of sketchy areas in the woods in Tennessee, as you might imagine. There's a prison there, and there's a pretty thriving meth industry, and those are the main employers in that particular area where the race is
really
held.
not a place you want to stray off what is not even a course.
You don't necessarily want to get lost and wind up on somebody else's property in the middle of the night. It's may not end too well, but it was a great race, and I'm glad I had the chance to do that.
Now let's talk about the Tahoe 200.
Yeah.
Because to those that want to, and we'll do some contact information, everything at the end of this, but you have a phenomenal blog where you sort of cover a lot of these different races and experiences you've had. Tahoe 200 to me was because I had started following you because this is several years, I think, after we had met.
Mm-hmm.
This is the most insane thing I think I've ever heard of anyone trying to accomplish. So essentially it is the rim trail around Lake Tahoe, correct? Was it 1 loop?
Yeah. So the TRT, the Tahoe Rim Trail, is 165 miles, but part of it goes through Desolation Wilderness, which is a federal forest, and you're not allowed to have races in general on federal property. So for the Tahoe 200, I said, oh, no problem. We'll just go further around Desolation Wilderness. So you're doing most of the TRT trail plus a little bonus excursion through some very remote mountains. Yeah.
And so 200 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what the heck is that like? How does your body endure that, recover from that? I know reading your blog, it was hilarious because you said I jumped out and did the first 100 miles too fast, but like what is, you're towing the line for a 200-mile race? Just kind of take some time to walk me through what that experience was like.
Sure. So to put it in context for everyone, this is a time in my life where I'd really kind of gone all in with my running side project. I had a pretty flexible job, working from home with flexible hours and not a lot of family commitments. I thank my wife, Amy, who's also a runner, for doing the most of raising our son at the time. So I was fortunate in that I was able to really put in some training to see what I could accomplish. And that particular year, I finished Hard Rock, which is, I think most people consider the hardest 100-mile race. And I did quite well. I think I was maybe 13th place. So like I said, held off some of the top pro runners. I was right up there in the top amateurs and really feeling fit and feeling good about myself, doing all the little things. Like I have well, you can't see it, it's off camera, but I have a hypoxic generator. It removes oxygen from the air and replaces it with nitrogen. And then, yeah, maybe grab it later, but you wear this flight mask and you're breathing this low concentrated oxygen air. And the idea is that it prompts some physiological changes in your body, your blood acidity, and just gets you used to breathing low oxygen air. I was watching my diet. I was training 120, 125 miles a week, just doing everything
Massive
right.
numbers.
Yeah, and I thought this is my chance to see what I'm capable of. I know I'm gonna get older. I'm gonna have to start working more. I have to carry my my weight in the family and raising my son. But this was an opportunity to really just let's see what I can accomplish. So after that Hard Rock race, I was signed up for the Tahoe 200, really feeling good, and I was confident I was going to win the race. There were people coming over. Australia's 100K champion, and even some of my local friends who are strong runners. But I thought I'm going for it. I'm going to see what I can do here. And so, Brent, as you described, I approached it like it was a 100-mile race. I ran the first 100 miles as hard as I could, all out effort, ridiculous. And at one point in the race, I'd amassed a 4 or 5 hour lead, depending on, it's a bit hard because you come to one aid station and then they track how long to the next runner. So it was 4 or 5 hours. And the race director was already tweeting on Twitter, John Burton about to accomplish history. The win was in the bag. There's no way I could lose. I had an insurmountable lead, 20 miles to go. And spoiler alert, I finished third. So
Third.
the wheels came off the bus, whatever metaphor, analogy, it became ridiculous. A good buddy of mine, Jeff Clowers, was out there with me. You can have a friend.
Yeah, Jeff, I know Jeff.
Yeah, you can at nighttime. You can, for safety reasons, you can have a friend kind of running with you.
Pacer.
Second half of the race, they call it a pacer. Yeah, it's some people take it seriously, and the pacer is out front setting the pace, and like a coach. But there was none of that. We were just walking. I'm not even going to call it hiking. I was walking, putting one foot in front of the other. And just to underscore how bad this was, my feet, Brent, you'd mentioned the Black Hills race where we met, where afterwards my feet were so wet
Destroyed.
and wrinkled, it looked like a topo map, right? You could just see these big lines and grooves that really looked like a 3D topo map. It was even worse at the Tahoe 200 after 65 hours of being out there in the rain, in the water, running. And so we were on this rocky road, boulders and sharp pieces of granite and little rocks everywhere. And it was so bad that my buddy Jeff, he was pointing them out to me like, okay, there's a rock, there's a rock. Because every time I stepped on one, the blisters on my feet and just the excruciating burning pain. And so I wish I had a video of this. It must have been ridiculous. Like I'm tiptoeing or trying to avoid rocks on this little trail while, the runners behind me got their trekking poles and they come flying by and just leave me in the dust. I think they put an hour on me, the last 10 miles. In terms of, how do you recover from something like that? I didn't make it to the award ceremony. I finished third. I got this nice handmade award. I couldn't even go pick it up because I was laying in my motel bed. I couldn't get out of bed. I was supposed to check out. I called them. I said, I'm staying another day. I can't get out. I physically cannot get out of bed. And then I had work, so I had to get home. I drove home somehow, went to work and did my job. But it probably took 6 months for my body to recover from that.
Yeah.
Every night for at least the first 3 or 4 weeks, I would wake up and my pillowcase and my sheets were just soaking wet. Like you could wring out the pillowcase and just sweat would drip out of it because my hormonal system, my endocrine system was so out of whack from adrenal fatigue and excess cortisol, and it was serious.
That's
blood
frighten you to have your body responding in that way.
Yeah, I mean, my blood work, some technical things with my CBK levels. So your tissue, your muscular tissue breaks down, and then you get those basically sludge chunks of your muscle protein floating through your blood, right? Your body, your kidney, livers, you're trying to filter the stuff out, and it can cause a adrenal kidney failure in some cases. You have to get those levels down, and then just the hormonal stuff being out of whack. Like, I'm not a super emotional guy, but I'm sitting around and I just start crying randomly. My wife's like, well, "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" I'm like, "Oh, Victor put a nice comment on Facebook." Bawling, tearing up. And now I look back at it, I'm like, "Oh man, I was in a bad place there. That was like some serious damage, not just to the muscles, but as I said, to the endocrine and the hormonal system." So yeah, I'm with you. I've never done a 200-mile race. I know there's some people they do
Well, you
three or
finished
four.
it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I finished it and I was happy with it, but I did not sign up again next year.
Yeah.
Put it
That
that
was
way.
that was a one and done basically.
Yeah, I think so. I thought about maybe going back and trying again another time, maybe a little more conservative effort, not hammering the first 100 miles so hard. But I've seen people who've done 3 or 4 of these races in a year. So it is humanly possible. It is physically possible. You probably just have to have a little more self-control and go at it
Sure.
a bit more reasonably, I guess.
Sure. So what's next for you in terms of you're overcoming an injury right now, correct?
Yeah, I had knee surgery last November. I no longer have any cartilage left in my knees, but I don't want to blame that on running. I think
Yeah.
the doctor said it's probably genetic, and if anything, the running is what kept me from, I don't have arthritis. I don't have a lot of knee pain. I didn't even know that I didn't have any cartilage until a piece of the cartilage that had broken off kind of moved its way to the back of the knee and was causing the knee to catch. So it was
Yeah.
interfering with my running. So they did the surgery to remove that piece of cartilage. That's I'm like, oh yeah, by the way, you have no cartilage at all in your knee. Yeah, okay. So I still enjoy running, and I rehabbed from that, and I won a local 50K race where I used to have the course record, and I broke my own course record from when I was a younger, fitter guy by 15 minutes. So I don't think
On
my
the
run,
repaired
yeah,
knee.
yeah, on the repaired knee. So
Wow.
I can still run. I've still got some fitness. I'm just trying to be a little more careful because I would like to continue running as long as possible, and I enjoy cycling. As you can see the bikes behind me, and
Yeah.
I enjoy indoor rowing. I actually, where is it? This out, Brent. I I rode a marathon, so 42 kilometers in my garage on my stationary rower, and they sent me this pin. It was 306 marathon, which is, not too bad. So, even if I can't run, I have other things I enjoy, cycling, mountain biking with my son, doing the rowing stuff. But yeah, so during the pandemic, a lot of races were canceled, and I think
Yep.
that worked out well because it gave my body a bit of a rest. I've been pushing myself. We met in 2011. It was really 2013 where 2013, 14, 15, where I went all in for a few years. And yeah, it took a lot out of me. So when the pandemic came around, I think it was good to give my body a little rest and recovery, re-energize. So I still enjoy running. I'd like to get back and do hard rock again,
Yeah.
my favorite race. But my project right now, a couple of things. So here in the Santa Cruz Mountains here in California, there used to be a train line that ran from San Jose all the way to Santa Cruz through the mountains. And there were
Oh.
7 or 8 portals or tunnels that they had to blast through the mountains. And so they had this train line. Eventually, trains got bigger with gauge trains, and they couldn't fit through these narrow tunnels, and it was too expensive to retrofit the tunnels. So they abandoned these tunnels. A lot of them they dynamited shut, uh, but there's still a couple that are open that you can go into. And so that was the project that I was working on this year, was just going out running in the mountains and trying to find all these tunnels.
Hmm.
So find one entrance to the tunnel, and then if you can't go through because it's barricaded, you kind of have to go overland, through people's private property. Their dogs are chasing you, all kinds of crazy stuff. But yeah, so I completed that. I found all the tunnels, and then I started a new project. So where I live, it's near this New Almaden Quicksilver Park.
Yes.
It used to be owned by Quicksilver Mining Company. So there's hundreds of miles of mining tunnels underneath this park. Most of them are flooded, even though they're above sea level. I think the park gets up to 2,000 feet above sea level.
Mhm.
And even if you go down to just 800 feet above sea level, everything under 800 feet above sea level is underwater in these
Hmm.
tunnels. And because of all that moisture and humidity, the timber, the braces that they use, they blasted this rock back in the day with black gunpowder or dynamite, and so it cracks the ceiling as well. So they prop everything up with this timber, but that timber's been down there 100 years, and with the humidity in the water, it's all kind of rotting, and then it collapses. So most of these tunnels are collapsed, except for a few that they preserved or maintained. But that was my project that I was working on, and I'm almost done with now, which is to try to find every mining tunnel that's still open or closed up. And most of them are closed up, but I found a few where I think they were so remote and so tough to get to that they maybe couldn't bring down lumber or concrete or whatever they wanted to use to seal up the entrance. So they just put a bunch of dirt in front of the entrance. But over the year, animals or whatever have clawed their way in. So now you can kind of see like a little narrow passage and you can crawl in there.
It's normal weekend activities for most people.
You know, my wife's not happy about this. Well, I got the insurance policy now, so now she's a little more cool with it, life insurance policy. But yeah, I was starting to think, probably don't want to go too deep into these tunnels because a lot of the tunnels you go in like this, but then there's a shaft that goes down a couple hundred or a couple thousand feet. And while there probably was, a wooden ladder at one point, I doubt those wooden ladders are still there or in usable shape. So if you fall a few hundred feet down, even if you land in the water, it's going to be a little tricky to climb back out of there. There's probably natural gases, toxic gases in there as well.
Snakes.
So
I'm thinking snakes.
I found this, Brent, I don't know what it was. It was a rat, but it looked like a rat, but it was huge. It was the size of a house cat. I saw that thing in there. I'm like, oh, well, okay, I'm
That's
out.
it.
I don't want to see what else is living in these tunnels. But yeah, so snakes would be, I don't mind snakes, but it's the giant rat that kind of freaked me out.
Yeah. So John, let me ask you this. So if people want to contact you or again, you've got a great blog that you've kept up over the years. How do they find you?
Yeah. So, I'm not selling anything. I don't have a paid coaching service or write books. I just enjoy running and helping people out. So if people have questions or they want to improve or they want to know how to train for a certain race, I can send you my email address, or like you said, I do have the runningjohn.blogspot.com, but I haven't really updated that in many years just because kind of ran its natural conclusion. The whole point of that blog was to document me training for my first 100-miler.
Yeah.
And finishing my first 100-miler because I'd failed a couple of times. So I wanted to document that process. But then I completed the race and completed a few more, and I tried to write race reports and make them a little bit entertaining to describe it. But
they're really fun to those that want to read
yeah,
them.
but I felt it accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, which is just document this process of going from an everyday business computer software guy, not particularly gifted athlete, to accomplishing some of these crazy things. So kind of left that out there as a little bit of history. But people are free to reach out to me. I don't have time to do full-time coaching business anymore, but I work with one or two people at a time. I don't charge anything. I'm just trying to give back a little bit. So yeah, if anyone has questions or they're interested in, how do I get into this race or how do I do that? Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help if I can.
And I would also say, and you'll be familiar with these guys. And if you're listening in Arizona, or I think now they've expanded up into Colorado, and you want to put your toe into this world, there's a phenomenal group called Aravaipa Running.
Yes.
Here in Arizona. It's Jamil Corey. You probably know. I know of him. You know him pretty
Jamil
well.
And I did Barkley together, and if you watch his video, I think it's called "The Year the Barkley Won."
Okay.
It's about a 30-minute video he filmed. I got a couple cameos in there. You can see we're actually breaking into Brushy Mountain Penitentiary. You got to, like Shawshank Redemption. You have to sneak in through the sewage tunnel underneath the prison. The water's just flowing. It's like a raging river. And there's a shot of Jamil working the camera, and I'm like, I think maybe we could do it. I'm gonna go check it out. So
okay, so you know Jamil pretty well.
Yeah.
The awesome thing about Aravaipa, and I can't sing the praises of these guys enough, is you can go out and they'll hold these races over the weekend. I've personally gotten to know all these beautiful mountain ranges we have outside of Phoenix because of Aravaipa. Mm-hmm. You can sign up for a 5K. Up to, in some cases, 100 miles or more, and they're weekend events that these things are occurring. And they do just an absolutely fantastic job. Again, I know of Jamil. His son, he actually has a child at my son's school as well. But I've always could not speak highly enough about the work that those guys do in putting together those races. And for me personally, again, I've gotten to know the countryside around my town here in a way, and intimately in a way I never would have had they not been out there doing what they do. So yeah, I would say anybody in Phoenix, pretty much almost every other weekend, particularly this time of year in the summertime, they do night runs and they put on fantastic events. It's a great way to get out there and get kind of a feel for the spirit of what happens at these races, for sure. So parting comments, John, just if you had to tell anybody's thinking about maybe entering this world, might not even be running, maybe it's to challenge themselves in something that might be completely foreign or different. Doesn't even have to be physical. In 2 sentences, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say don't be intimidated by the end goal, which seems completely unreasonable, alien, unachievable. Break it down into manageable pieces and just apply a consistent methodology. Start working towards those little goals, checking them off, and approach it like a project.
And great things can happen.
Anything else in life, and you'll probably get there.
Yeah, awesome. John, thank you so much for joining me. This was awesome.
Thank you, Brent. Really appreciate it.
This has been fantastic. John, thank you so much. Brent, I always learn a ton. I didn't know there were races that you could like stop and eat quesadillas and tacos.
Totally.
Because maybe
beer at the aid station.
Some of them they do.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Okay, well, they got something for everybody. Maybe even me. We'll see. I don't know. It wouldn't be a 50-mile, but maybe like a 900, 1000. Is that even a word? Yard dash? Maybe if I could just like dash 1,000 yards and eat tacos, that's fine.
I don't know what to do with my hands.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fantastic. Again, thank you both for great content and a great podcast. And our last thank you, of course, goes to you, the listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Smart Money Pod. Doggone, I did it again, Brent. I did that last time too. Sorry. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with Brent Mekosh. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Brent comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And we humbly ask that you share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, as this actually does help others find the show. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at MP Advisors, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.